Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast. And now your host, EYAL Levy.
Welcome to the URM Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. It's crazy to think that we are now on our 7th year. Don't ask me how that all just flew by, but it did. Man, time moves fast. And it's only because of you, the listeners. If you'd like us to stick around another 7 years, and there's a few simple things you can do that would really help us out. I would endlessly appreciate if you would, number 1, share our episodes with your friends. Number 2, post our episodes on your Facebook and Instagram and tag me at EYAL Levy URM Audio and at URM Academy, and of course, our guest. And number 3, leave us reviews and 5-star reviews wherever you can. We especially love iTunes reviews. Once again, thank you for all the years and years of loyalty. I just want you to know that we will never charge you for this podcast, and I will always work as hard as possible to improve the episodes in every single way. All we ask in return is a share, a post, and tag us. Oh, and one last thing. Do you have a question you would like me to answer on an episode? I don't mean for a guest. I mean for me. It can be about anything. Email it to me at eyal@urm.academy. That's EYAL@urm.academy. There's no .com on that. It's exactly the way I spelled it. And use the subject line, Answer Me EYAL. All right, let's get on with it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the URM Podcast. My guest today is Grammy-nominated mixer, engineer, producer, Geoff Swan, who's worked with everyone from Ed Sheeran, Charli XCX, Yungblood, and many, many more. Let's get into this. Here goes. Geoff Swan, welcome to the URM Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. I have something that I've always wondered about in pop production. There's a lot of people involved in pop production. So coming from the metal world where it's, there's lots of, I'd say the majority of metal productions are lone wolf style or a duo where there's the main person that was hired and then that person's assistant, or there's that duo plus the mixer who's maybe a lone wolf or maybe mixer plus assistant. But it's usually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people total on the entire production team, whereas in pop, from what I've seen, there's a lot more people involved. And so what I'm wondering is, so when you see people's pop credits, what does that mean? Because I've seen some people who list that they've worked with certain artists, and I know they have, I know it's true, but it's like assistant engineer or, not the role that you would think from looking at their Instagram. So I'm wondering is, how do you interpret pop credits correctly?
It's very different from project to project, but I think that certainly in pop music, you have a lot more stakeholders, like definitely from the writing to the production to usually, if it's an album, I mean, there can be like 4 or 5 different mixers on it. Usually one mastering engineer, but like when you're talking about like even just one song, there can be multiple people involved and multiple people with different opinions. But I tend to find, like, for the most part, when I'm working with specific artists doing, like mixing the bulk of an album or like mixing a song that's got several producers on it, there'll generally be like a figurehead or somebody that's kind of like almost executive producing that you can lean on for direction, I guess.
Someone has to be charting the course.
Absolutely. It becomes like rudderless if you haven't got that. And certainly I think like pop mixing, which is really the world that I see more than anything else, is you're really about enhancing a collective vision rather than, you're not trying to break down what you've been given and rebuild it in a completely different form. Sometimes you do, but for the most part it's about like where are people trying to go with this? Like what can I bring to the table to give them more of that, and take it to the next step, whether that's 5-10% more or, a little bit more than that if you can, if there's room to add it in. But generally speaking, you do have to have somebody that spearheads the production of the record. And sometimes it's the artist, it all varies from project to project. So yeah, I mean, roles, when you look at what somebody does in terms of a credit situation. I mean, it's always, there are assistant engineers that do a lot more than assist. And then there's also like engineers that don't really do that much engineering, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just take it with a grain of salt.
I mean, like, I don't think there's like there's not a hard and fast rule. I think people that tend to work in and build credits within a role, they do that because they've shown their ability to do that job well. And so they get rehired and reused again. And you build relationships with people. And it might be a relationship with a producer where you become their go-to person for engineering purposes, or it might be, you become somebody's go-to mixer, or, whatever your role may be. It's really about building a name for yourself. And then also if you're doing that assistant role and you're doing more than that assistant role and you're consistently doing that, is how do you step out of that and then, maybe get the credit that you should be getting, or how do you negotiate that, like that next step, I guess.
Yeah. How do you go about balancing the needs and expectations of a big team, or do you usually just interface with one main person? Generally,
what I always like to do is be in touch with that figurehead that we were talking about a second ago, like being in touch with the producer or the artist directly if they're very invested in the mixing process, or or sometimes it's a combination of being involved with producer, A&R, management, and involved with everyone. But generally, what I tend to find is almost like hit one person's expectations at a time to an extent. Like, so generally speaking, if you've got a project where an artist is, artists have busy lives in the pop world, definitely. They're touring relentlessly, they're doing promo. Like all artists, I think in all genres are busy. They're busy being artists. So a producer can often be, a great conduit for communicating what they want from a mix, or what they're hearing is wrong with it, and translating it into language that is, maybe a bit easier to understand or slightly more palatable, like to my ears, just and explain to me what they want. So I quite often, deal with getting it right for the producer and the artist first, and then if there's a label involved and management, and there's opinions coming from that side as well. Then once we've got to a point where we're feeling good about a record, it's then about diving in and letting the next set of opinions come in, I guess. It's like that's an ideal situation. It doesn't always work like that. If you can tackle it, rather than having conflicting opinions coming at you via notes, like multiple notes from multiple people, that can make it very difficult. But to be honest with you, most people I work with are really good at vetting that before it ever gets to me. I think, and again, that's having that person that can kind of lead the charge, so to speak, and go, okay, well, I've got all these notes from everyone, I've collected what everyone's saying, and this is what we need to pass on to Geoff to address, I guess.
I mean, that's what I tell mixers to do when they're dealing with bands as far as mix notes, is tell them to compile them and
100%.
Communicate with only one person. No texts in the middle of the night. Just if it doesn't go through that one person, it doesn't count. So that one person speaks for the group as a whole.
And when you can implement that, or when it's implemented for you, it is always a smoother process. And I think that the nature of working with bands, like a traditional band setup, is that everyone is coming at it from both a unified perspective and also an individual standpoint. So, I think once you're at a point, the best situation with any mix is to get it where everyone's feeling good about it. And really what you're doing is from that point onwards, experimenting with like trying other people's wishes. Like it doesn't matter if you get to mix 6 and everyone's happy with it. Like, you've gone and you've done any major overhauls, you've done any minor overhauls, and then suddenly somebody wants the guitars, 3 dBs louder in this section, and somebody wants to try something that other people don't agree with. Well, for the time it takes to run a pass like that, why deny people the ability to hear it? That's my philosophy on it anyway.
You've got the hard part out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I'm always a little bit suspicious when things get signed off on Ref 1. I'm like, really? Like, you're 100%.
That used to stress me out.
It kind of stresses me out. I'm happy that people like things, but I'm also like, well, is this going to be something that, we're definitely 100% done? Or is this going to be something that we park for a month and then suddenly it's like, oh,
yeah, am I going to hear about this 6 months later? That's my fear. When I was mixing, my fear was always there were some of the locals never did this, but some of the sign bands did this. Not all, only a few, but it only happened a few times where we'd get like, "That's great" on mix one. It's like, what do you mean that's great? Do you have any notes? No, it's awesome. You sure? Because I knew it wasn't done. And then those times have come back to bite me in the ass. It's like good for a first mix, and they're happy with that, but they were new bands, and they hadn't had the experience of having their music mixed professionally. So they didn't really understand the process of mixed notes. So, then 6 months later, they realize that they don't like it. That's not a good time for them to realize it.
No, it's not. But also, I think that's one of the joys and kind of the curses of working with new artists. And certainly artists at a local level. My experience of doing that was very much like they would often be wowed by the results they would get because they'd maybe never heard themselves recorded before, and certainly never heard themselves recorded with the kind of touching up that is possible. But then also you'd either get, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, this is like, we're so fucking happy we don't, we're done. This is great. And then on an equal footing, you'd also get, like, I played it to my mate from college that's doing a production course, and he says, like, this is not right with it. And then you'd be like, okay, well, we can do your mate from college's notes. That's fine if you want to do that. But like often it would generally be, having an opinion for opinion's sake, I guess.
Man, once a producer I used to work with, he did not do spec deals and did not work with unsigned in general. But there was this one unsigned band that had some friends of mine in it that they're very, very talented. I really felt like they needed a shot. So I talked my partner into us doing 2 songs on spec and getting them signed. And so we gave them a very basic 1-pager. Basically, you do this with us, you get signed from it, we get the right of refusal, or you buy this out. Like the basics. There was nothing crazy in it. But one of them's roommates was a law student, and that person started marking it up. And basically we got back a 1-page simple agreement where literally every sentence had red line under it. It never got done.
In those instances, it's like you sometimes you hear something and you think, this is too good not to work with. And you go, well, how can I protect myself, but also offer somebody an opportunity? And then mechanics somewhere come into play, and it's just messes it up for everyone. Because, in that instance, it's certainly with bands and artists that are really just starting out, like whatever kind of leg up they can get, it's a good thing. And if it's like and a basic, like, a 1-page document that just protects your interests and explains to them how it works, shouldn't be something that goes through that kind of intense vetting.
It wasn't like some 60-page deal.
Yeah, like you weren't like grabbing their image rights and like saying you can or anything like that. So yeah.
No, we were just trying to help them out. We didn't formally like walk on the project. We saw the markup and we're like, this is going to be more of a pain in the ass than it's worth. And that was it. It was over. Man, I wonder how many local bands have shot themselves in the foot doing that sort of thing. I've heard of quite a few over the years who were, quote unquote, holding out for the right deal and turned down all kinds of deals. And you hear about like the very few that have succeeded from that. But I think by and large, that is a stupid thing to do.
I'm from very small town, like, or just outside. I'm like from the countryside, so like there was a small music scene when I was growing up in this town, and there was a lot of like talented people and talented bands, but there was a lot more like emulation than innovation, like there was a lot of like sounding like other people rather than like pushing forward and doing something new. And the bands that really like stood out and were doing something different, there has to be like a basis of understanding of like what you're trying to achieve. And I think like I'm talking about like the early 2000s, like late 90s, like there wasn't the plethora of information there is today about like different deals and different opportunities. You couldn't, there wasn't the resources that are available. And I think that like at that time, everyone was just like trying to play live and get in front of industry people where possible to, go and play shows in London and try and showcase what they could do for somebody to give them the financial backing to take things to the next stage, whatever that may be. Whereas I think now people are more savvy, which is a good thing.
Very good thing.
Also I think the knock-on effect of that is sometimes people are too savvy in a way. And on the flip side of that, also naive, a record deal is not necessarily the way to go for a lot of bands. You don't need to do it. So if you're a certain type of artist, why would you do that? Why not build yourself to a point where you're the person calling the shots, not look for somebody else to help you take it to the next level yourself, and then negotiate the best option for yourself. But certainly shopping yourself around for a deal if you haven't got that platform in place is a very difficult thing to do.
Totally. I do think obviously being savvy is really, really important. But what you're saying about being too savvy is, I think it's a lot like in mixing, where people I've noticed in the URM community will get too hung up on little things, and that prevents them from moving forward. And I've noticed when people are too savvy, sometimes they overthink these insignificant little details that don't matter, in a contract, or the timing of every single last little thing, instead of just staying consistent and putting out more and more and more. I feel like I see a lot of mixers in URM, when we give them the Nail the Mix tracks, we're giving the actual tracks that came into us from the mixer. So real sessions in real life, they all have mistakes in them. There's always going to be something weird, no matter who's producing or mixing. If humans did it, there's going to be human error. It's without a doubt, always. And then it's your job as a mixer or, the mix assistant, whoever, to solve those problems. Or there's always going to be something. And I've noticed that there's a level of student who hold themselves back because they see those problems as there's something wrong with the files, as opposed to, no, this is part of it. You need to solve these problems.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to that. I still challenge myself and remind myself today about that. When something comes in and I'm like, this would be so much better if it just wasn't like this, or why did they do it like that? But that's part of the production. So you've got to work with it, and you've also got to like you say, not focus on the minutiae. It's about broad strokes and the bigger picture. So if there's something that's not right with the file, in your opinion, if you can fix it and see if it changes the feel of the track. It depends on what it is. Something that happens more often than not, I find, is that you might get a vocal in that's not been recorded in a particularly great environment, but you clean it up too much. You make it, you lose the room ambience that's not necessarily there intentionally, but it's part of the vibe and part of the sound. It's okay, well, the vocal is technically better, but it doesn't feel as good. I think that's something that is a learning process, with mixing and producing as well. You just kind of feel that out as your experience grows. You kind of have to make that mistake to realize that it is a mistake, if that makes sense. Because your intentions are good by cleaning that vocal up, but it might not necessarily benefit the song. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then the sunk time fallacy kicks in, where someone will feel well, I did the work, so yeah, I can't just undo it. I put the time in. Yeah.
It's I've spent 3 hours doing this. Just that's and and I, dude, I've been there so many times with various things where I've spent hours and hours and hours on things, and then to literally get a response going, "No, we preferred it before," and you're like, "Okay, cool." No worries. You just got to take it on the chin. That again kind of relates back to the experimentation thing. It's okay, well, let's try this. I might state that something is going to be better if I do this. I'm then send it to somebody and they go, no, it's not better. It's, music's opinion based. So, and if the general consensus is that, they're right and I'm wrong, then that's cool. You just got to you've just got to not have any ego about it, I guess. Or fatigue. Really, you've got to be I can't, the amount of time I spent on this, it's not something that I need to just put it out of my mind. It never happened. It wasn't, it's done now. You're not going to get it back. So like, don't think on it anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting how if you don't engage your ego and just let it go, you will forget that it even happened. Like, because the previous version will become the version you're working on. That idea you had is long gone, and you don't even remember what it really sounded like after a while. Like, if you let it go properly, like, it doesn't have to be difficult.
Well, I always find it hilarious, like when I've mixed something and I've been focusing on minutiae, or like I've just been, going crazy over a part that's been bugging me or whatever, and then, I suddenly hear the song 3 months later, and I'm just not listening, being critical. I'm just like, the song's there in the background. I'm like, oh, that part doesn't even remotely, but I didn't even think about that part until after the song finished, and I reminded myself, because that song has conjured up the memories of the mix, not because it was. And I'm not, I that happens so often that it's like you've got to be able to consume music. I think production and mixing particularly, you've got to be able to consume music like the consumer. Like, people aren't going to listen to records in the way that you listen to them. That doesn't mean it's not your responsibility to like concern yourself with it being the best it can be and question everything. But like, when people hear that song, the majority of people are going to be like the song, don't like the song, that guitar riff's cool, that bass line's wicked, didn't like this, didn't like that, but they're not gonna be like, oh, that tom's got like this horrible resonance at 600 hertz, and it's
no, they're
like,
not.
Like, nobody's gonna think that.
No, man, I just went through that, tracking Evertune guitars on the new Doth stuff. Like, so the thing is with Evertunes is they're not perfectly in tune. It's just they're better in tune. So instead of dealing with 15-cent or 20-cent variations, you're looking at like 3 cents. But still, once you're dialed in, you start to hear that. And then everything starts to sound out of tune. And so like, you get into this really weird headspace where you can hear 2 or 3 cents and it makes you insane. And so you're hyper focused, like with the strongest magnifying glass possible, your guitars, and going nuts. And then I won't hear it for a week, and then I won't. Sounds perfectly fine. Sounds great. I didn't notice any tuning issues whatsoever.
It's just funny how we can zero in like that, isn't it?
It's your focus. You're zoomed in when you're in the studio.
Yeah, and it's also like I spend most of my days sitting in front of a pair of NS10s, right? Like, they're not pleasant speakers to listen to. They don't give you anything. Like, they're not. They don't. You don't turn them on in the morning and go, I'm listening to something that's really gratifying. Like, when something's wrong or like something jumps out, like because of, I guess, and it's probably the same with anyone working on any pair of speakers that they've worked on for a long time. When something's wrong on them, it's just constantly like hitting you in the head with a hammer, just going,
and that's the point.
This isn't right. Yeah, and that's what you want, of course. But like, I find like regular ear breaks and just walking away very, very regularly is the best way to combat that. And also, like, my assistant, like, I will quite regularly, like, he becomes my extra set of monitors in the room, because I can be like focusing on something. I won't say anything to him about it. And then like, I'll be like, is that snare bugging you? And he's like, no. I'm like, okay, well, it's not bugging you. You haven't even thought about it until like I mentioned it. And then if I have to actually describe what I'm talking about, like, I know it's not a problem. I know it's just me zeroing in on it. Like, it's good to like, it's good to canvass opinions sometimes on these things, because they can stop you spending hours and hours going down rabbit holes, basically.
However, though, sometimes you're right. And that's where the head games come in, because like, for instance, like you just said about the vocal, cleaning up the vocal and losing the vibe, where it's objectively better, but it's worse. Like, this just had this issue with pre-pro tracks. I'm wondering if you've had this so I had these pre-pro tracks for these clean guitars. Well, I pre-pro for everything, but the clean guitars specifically, they're not perfect, but they were perfect for the part, I guess. I recorded them at the exact right tempo when I wrote them. But then in the studio, we redid them like higher quality, like more attention to all the details, and they were objectively better performed, better sounding, better just better. Like, it's just, if there was a test, they would get a higher grade.
Right.
But not better feeling and not better in the song. But then the question becomes, do I have demo-itis, or am I right that the demo is actually better? So have you ever had that type of second guessing where it's like, I think this is better, or am I just being crazy right now?
That must be harder, like when it's something that you've written and you're playing. That's like an extra level to it.
Or maybe not, though, because I know what it's supposed to be.
But like sometimes I think like you know what it's supposed to be, but then you do have to trust the feel of something. I would always trust the feel of something. I mean, like a really good example, and I've had this happen maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 times where like a song's been cut in a writing session, very, very basically. And a scratch vocal has been recorded when an artist is not thinking about it, just relaxed, having a good time, really just like feeling the song. And it's been recorded on like an SM7B in a room with people making noise, with like shitty noise all over it. But there's something about that take that's great. Then it's gone off, the song's gone off and been produced and worked on, and multiple versions of it have been created. You know, along the way, it's been sped up 5 BPM. And so that vocal has, you know, been pushed and pulled about and it's been sped up. Mm-hmm. But there's, you know, like crazy kind of aliasing going on by this point. The vocal, you are limited to what you can do with that vocal. But there's still something magic about it. And then everyone knows that like this has happened to the vocal. So it's like, let's recut the vocal. And 9 times out of 10, that demo vocal stays because there's a feeling in it. And it's like, it can go through that process of being pushed and pulled about, run through like CLA Vox 5 times, you know, pitched up, you know, sped up, whatever, but there's still some magic in that original capture that you can't recreate.
Yeah.
Or you can recreate it, but it then just sounds like a bad imitation of what it should be, if that makes sense. So
then now the mix students get it and they're like, why do I hear problems? It's like, you don't know, you weren't there. You don't know why you're hearing aliasing or artifacts. It could be exactly what you just said, because that was one of the reasons for redoing some pre-pro. And I've experienced this in the studio too with other artists, is engineer wanted to redo it because I had time stretched things trying to find the right tempo. And there were artifacts in the DIs. That's fair enough. But if the proper one doesn't feel better, then who gives a shit at the end of the day?
Yeah, it doesn't. It really doesn't matter. It's like it's that's also your job. Like when it comes to mixing, if you're sent something that's, you know, like that, like you just got to make it the best version of what it can be. And like sometimes the answer isn't like cleaning it up and then, you know, slamming it through whatever compressor and EQ. It's really about like, okay, let's just start with it raw, balance it in, and then, you know, and then work out what can we do to fix it for like, not fix it, but like make it make it more of what it is, enhance the feeling of it, you know, like what can we do to it to enhance what they like about that in a positive way.
Hey everybody, if you're enjoying this podcast, then you should know that it's brought to you by URM Academy. URM Academy's mission is to create the next generation of audio professionals by giving them the inspiration and information to hone their craft and build a career doing what they love. You've probably heard me talk about Nail the Mix before, and if you're a member, you already know how amazing it is. At the beginning of the month, Nail the Mix members get the raw multi-tracks to a new song by artists like Lamb of God, Angels and Airwaves, Knock Loose, Opeth, Meshuggah, Bring Me the Horizon, Gojira, Asking Alexandria, Machine Head, and Papa Roach, among many, many others. Over 60 at this point. Then at the end of the month, the producer who mixed it comes on and does a live streaming walkthrough of exactly how they mix the song on the album and takes your questions live on air. And these are guys like TLA, Will Putney, Jens Bogren, Dan Lancaster, Tui Madsen, Andrew Wade, and many, many more. You'll also get access to MixLab, which is our collection of dozens of bite-sized mixing tutorials that cover all the basics. as well as Portfolio Builder, which is a library of pro-quality multi-tracks cleared for use in your portfolio, so your career will never again be held back by the quality of your source material. And for those of you who really want to step up their game, we have another membership tier called URM Enhanced, which includes everything I already told you about and access to our massive library of fast tracks, which are deep, super detailed courses on intermediate and advanced topics like gain staging, mastering, low end, and so forth. It's over 500 hours of content, and man, let me tell you, this stuff is just insanely detailed. Enhanced members also get access to one-on-ones, which are basically office hour sessions with us, and Mix Rescue, which is where we open up one of your mixes and fix it up and talk you through exactly what we're doing at every step. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, if you're ready to level up your mixing skills in your audio career, head over to urm.academy to find out more.
Out of curiosity, since I know that you're into metal and a whole lot of people who listen to this are into metal, what I'm curious about is what is the big challenge in mixing pop versus metal? In metal, obviously, it's carving space, like when you have none, like how to make something that should not work in the real world work awesome. I think that's the number one challenge in metal mixing. But in pop, you have good arrangements and great sounds. So, but I know it's not easy. So I'm wondering what the challenges are as opposed to with metal.
The challenge that we all have when you're coming into a project as a separate entity, as a mixer, you're dealing with what's been done before. And the biggest thing that I find is that, we quite more often than not, productions come in and like what people have been listening to and where production mixes have got to, they're good. They sound good, but they're also slammed super loud. So it's like, okay, well, we haven't got headroom. Like there's certain things that when you do that to a track that you basically cement in certain things, like whether it's like the level of the bass or like just a general RMS of like a record, how loud things are versus everything else. Like I think one of the challenges is how do you make it better without, you haven't got the room to turn everything up. It is about carving space. And it's not always about pushing through. That same principle is there. It's like, how does everything sit and work and like work together and not get in each other's way. But I mean, I think with metal, and I mean, like, I'm no metal mixer. That's not something that I would ever profess to have mass expertise on. But I definitely think it's like when you're dealing with metal, I think there's a lot more broadband stuff going on. Like guitars are fucking hard to mix. Like rhythm guitars are hard to mix. Like to create space when you have got all of that frequency information going on, that is tough. Like that's really tough, I think. And whereas in pop, we do have, pop's constantly changing. It's not like, it's not a static entity in any respect. I think, you look at different time periods and the sonics of the music is sometimes really bright, sometimes really dark. Sometimes there's a lot of focus on 808s being the, soup du jour or whatever. But like sometimes it's some other sonic palette. So it's changing all the time. But there does tend to be a bit more space than I would say with like metal records in my experience of it. You're not necessarily dealing with something that's quite as relentless in terms of what's going on all the time. Does that make sense? I mean, you know a lot more about the metal world than I do.
It's interesting to me with pop how it's almost like different parts of a song are almost like different scenes in a movie. Like,
that's how I think about music.
So getting those to work together, I think, seems to me like one of the bigger challenges. But I don't know, maybe it's not.
Yeah, I think it's about making sure the flow and transition is like evident. Particularly, again, like living in the world where like we're not set up for like the massive dynamic shifts that you would have had 20, 30 years ago. Like it's not always when a chorus steps in, it has to step in, but it's not suddenly jumping up in like level. It's jumping up in terms of like what's going on parts wise. Like we're like, how are we going to, and maybe we're using width rather than volume to accent a change. I would say when I'm talking about like transitions from section to section, I think like the journey of records is the important thing with pop music. Is like if you've got 3 minutes or 2 minutes 30 now, like everything seems to just get shorter and shorter. You want people to go on that journey and then want to go straight back to the beginning, and hit play again. So it's like and that's all dependent on the type of record. Like if I get a record that's really, upbeat and has got a lot of like tempo to it, like I just want it to hit as hard as possible. Like I want the drums to bounce. I want as much thwack as possible so that it enhances that energy. So that when you get to the end, you just want to go back to the beginning again and have some more of that hype, if that makes sense. I don't know if that does make sense, but yeah. Yeah.
That does make perfect sense. How did you get to the point where you were no longer working with, just locals? Like, how did you get to the point where where people were coming to you, but they were people in the actual record industry? I'm sure it wasn't just one thing that happened, but what do you think was the big turning point? There had to be something that was a big turning point.
The biggest thing was definitely in terms of getting me out of just doing local bands and local artists was definitely going to work for Spike Stentors as assistant, because it was a huge education. It was a amazing, stressful, busy time of my life where I learnt a lot. I also just had exposure to understanding how records are made in that world, and then really like building, I guess, like having people come to me. It was like it sort of happened organically out of necessity as much as anything else. Because I set up the Ranch Production House with Neil Kennedy in 2008, and then Lewis Johns, who I know came on board engineering out of there. And both those guys are super, they're insanely good engineers, super talented. I still do learn a lot from them. If I want an opinion on a piece of gear or a mic or something, they're the first people I'd give a call. But they were very much focused on working in the genres that they worked in. And I think I'd kind of fallen out of love with that style of music by the time I was at that point in my life, I guess. And I was listening to a lot more electronic music. I was listening to a lot more pop music, a lot more kind of avant-garde stuff that I'd never really listened to when I was younger. The job with Spike came along at kind of the right time for me to go, okay, well, he's somebody that I really look up to, and he works on, he's not pigeonholed by genre. He works in such a wide range of genres, which is exactly what I wanted from my own career. I was like, this is somebody I could really learn something from and get a real, sense of, just a completely different understanding of mixing. Because up until that point, really, I was shit. I didn't know what I was doing, really. I'd fuck up my productions by mixing them a lot of the time, to be quite honest with you, because I'd just do too much. I wouldn't listen to where I'd got to with the band or an artist. I go, right, mixing, I'm going to completely change everything. And it's like, that's not the way to go. We spent weeks or a few days making a record, and they're happy with where it's at. So we need to expand on that. Again, going back to what I was saying, it just I was just kind of not playing my role as producer and mixer, particularly while I was producing, and then not mixing the record to where we wanted stuff to, where the artist did wanted stuff to be, or probably I had in my initial thought process, if that makes sense.
Totally. For people who want to work with signed artists, there's basically two paths. And one is either you find a way to work for someone who is working with the types of artists you want to work with, and you work for them. You learn how it's done. You learn who's in that world. You basically insert yourself in that world, make yourself valuable, or some band that you worked with becomes successful and people start coming to you because of what you did with them, and you grow together.
Yeah.
Those are basically the two paths I've seen that are the most common.
Yeah, you do. You're definitely right there. That there is that is kind of the pathways that you can go down. And I think the nature of assisting, and those guys that work in studios as runners and as assistant engineers, those guys have a work ethic built into them. I think before working for Spike, my work ethic was good, but it wasn't as good as it is now, because I wanted that job so bad. I was I'm gonna do the best I can. I was I'm available whenever I'm needed. I'll do whatever it's got to be done. And most people I know that are lucky enough and fortunate enough to have those opportunities in the few big studios that remain today, they have to have that work ethic, because it's very much dog eat dog. You've got to be the best you can be, and that's when any chance those are the situations where you get the chance to showcase what you can do, which can lead to more opportunities, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I mean, how else would you get those opportunities, or how else would you refine yourself to be at that level? I think every once in a while you'll find some genius from the middle of nowhere who figures it all out on their own. But that's super rare, super, super rare. Like most of the time you need a mentor, or you need to be taught how things are done, or else it's going to take you way too long to figure it out. Like that's why it's so great to have someone like Spike. Most people do get a mentor.
I don't know about you, but do you find like I find like I collect mentors over the years. Like I find and collaboration's just so important. Like, you know, in the sense of like learning from people, there's nothing better than collaborating with people. And the sooner, like, I think it is something that does happen with age to an extent, but the sooner you can drop like the concept of being an island and being like, you know, I'm gonna, like, a collaborative process is so much better than trying to do things in isolation, because you will learn so much quicker. And I mean, like, working with Neil and Lewis, I just seeing the techniques that they use to do certain things and just being able to borrow them and reinterpret them into, like, you know, my own workflow when I was at the ranch. And the same with Spike, and the same with, like, going back to when I first worked in studios, the first guys I ever worked with, like those and guitarists that like I looked up to in local bands, all of them have been mentors to me in some way, because I've just taken something from some information from them, and it's helped me to move on to the next step. And it's like, whilst, you know, it's great that we have so many resources these days to lean on for information, but I do think like there is nothing better than working with other people, you know, in the flesh and learning. Like you can't change that. I mean, like you can watch a YouTube video on like what happens if you change mic placement in this way or that way, but like actually being in the room and doing it and like seeing like the effect of it has, and like hearing the effect it has, like things like that are just they're really visceral. Like, you know, they just, if you can get tactile with that world, it just imparts itself into you much quicker, and I think and cements itself much better than anything else.
I mean, you have to do it in real life.
Yeah, for sure. That's the thing that kind of blows my mind. Like it was only the last time I was like recording like a metal type band, I guess, was probably like 2012, I guess, 2011, something like that. And like I was kind of blown away that like everything was brought in to like guide track wise, was like everything was done in like some guitar MIDI program.
Oh, Guitar Pro?
That was it, Guitar Pro, yeah. And then like the drummer he hadn't programmed his MIDI tracks, and like the whole thing was just like, you've written this record that's not bad in any respect, but you guys can't actually play.
Yeah, 2012, plus a lot of other things from that era, stupidities from that era, like, is what led to me starting URM. Guitar Pro, it's actually a great tool. If, like, for instance, you write something in order to document it, because just recording it, that's not enough, I think, because you might play it differently. Like, if you want to document exactly how to play it after you've written it and actually played it, Guitar Pro is great, especially if you want someone else in the band to learn it too. Like, there's all these great uses for it, but I noticed that a lot of bands would write in Guitar Pro without ever checking if it was playable. And that is just a disaster.
I remember like our control room was off to one side and we had no line of sight to the live room. The drummer had like set up this pretty standard kit, nothing particularly crazy about it. But I do remember he had like Z custom cymbals, and thinking, I hope he's not going to hit those too loud, because I was just, they were always like super, super loud whenever like I tracked them. I was like, that was my only thought, was like, I hope he's not going to like wail them too hard. Like, let's see how he plays. And I remember like hitting record, and I honestly thought he'd like fallen over into the drum kit. I was like, I stopped him and said, are you okay? He was like, yeah, why did you stop? And I was like, oh, okay, you can't play either. So like at that point, it's like, okay, well, let's program the drums. Let's have you play cymbals over the top, and like over the top of programmed drums. And then the Guitar Pro stuff, you just kind of like, you're just battling through, trying to get people to give you something that's like a usable take. And it's, you know, yeah, that definitely, I can see how that would definitely be an inspiration to kickstart education. That was bleak, that experience, to say the least.
It was that, and because I could see that home recording was starting to take off little by little. I could tell that it was about to explode. And coming into the studio, that was the early days of bands no longer coming in for a whole record, just coming in for drums, tracking all the guitars, maybe vocals themselves, then coming back in for a mix. And the shit they were giving us was so bad. Like, I'm not talking about on the level of, oh yeah, there's some problems, you need to fix them, like we were discussing earlier. It was just straight up shit. Yeah, I just felt like someone needed to show these people how to not fuck it up and how to do this.
I'm kind of imagining that these kind of things that you were getting were like clipped, like asking people to take DIs and then them giving you like super clipped DIs and just like that kind of thing.
And not in a good way.
No, like I can well imagine. It's amazing how many things can like go wrong between two stages that you're not involved in, like if you let people go away and do their own thing or they insist on going away and doing their own thing. It's like, if you don't have the knowledge, and that's what's so important to learn, like just the basics of signal flow. Like, I think it's essential, like to be able to record things properly. So yeah, I mean, it's a good job that they're out there now, those resources, for sure.
Totally. Well, Geoff, I think this is a good place to end the episode. I want to thank you for taking the time to hang out. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
All right, then. Another URM podcast episode in the bag. Please remember to share our episodes with your friends, as well as post them to your Facebook and Instagram or any social media you use. Please tag me at EYAL Levy URM Audio at URM Academy, and of course, tag our guests as well. I mean, they really do appreciate it. In addition, do you have any questions for me about anything? Email them to me at eyal@urm.academy. That's EYAL @urm.academy, and use the subject line, Answer Me, EYAL. All right, then. Till next time, happy mixing.
You've been listening to the Unstoppable Recording Machine podcast. To ask us questions, make suggestions, and interact, visit urm.academy and press the podcast link today.